Hannah and James met on an ordinary Tuesday morning, in a small coffee shop in Brooklyn. She was late for work, juggling her phone and a cup of caramel latte. He was sitting by the window, lost in a newspaper that smelled of ink and time. When she bumped into him, spilling half the drink over his sleeve, she apologized so many times that he couldn't help but laugh. That laugh, warm, unguarded, and easy, became the sound Hannah would later crave in the darkest nights of her life. James worked as a real estate agent. He had charm, confidence, and a dream big enough to fill the skyline. Hannah, on the other hand, was a schoolteacher, quiet, tender, and carrying a heart that had learned to love gently, almost cautiously. Her father had once told her, "Money can build walls around love if you're not careful." She never forgot that, but when James smiled, she felt walls crumble, not build. Their courtship was short but bright. They laughed under rain-soaked streets, shared dollar pizzas at midnight, and spoke about futures painted with golden light. Hannah loved his energy, the way he could make ordinary moments sparkle. He loved her steadiness, her calm, her patience, her belief in small joys. 2 years later, under a canopy of fairy lights and whispered promises, they married in her parents' backyard. It was not a grand wedding, just family, a few friends, and a borrowed speaker that played love songs slightly out of tune. But it was perfect, it was real, and for a while, so was their happiness. Marriage, at first, was laughter and warmth. Their apartment was tiny, but it echoed with dreams. They painted one wall yellow because Hannah said yellow felt like hope. They couldn't afford much, but they made do with what they had. They counted coins for groceries, shared second-hand furniture, and still managed to hold hands every evening. James promised her, "One day, you'll never have to worry about money again." She smiled softly, "As long as I have you, I won't." He believed her, but he also believed in the power of more success, more comfort, more security. Soon, that belief turned into obsession. An opportunity came, an investment deal in luxury apartments. The returns looked enormous. James took the risk, putting in all their savings. When Hannah hesitated, he said, "This is for us, Han. For the life we deserve." She wanted to believe, so she nodded. Months later, the deal worked. They made a fortune. Their tiny apartment turned into a penthouse with glass walls and city views. They bought a car that purred like success, and clothes that smelled of newness. Friends began to admire them, family called them lucky, and for a while, it all felt worth it. But money has a sound, soft at first, like a whisper. Then louder, like a storm. It began to drown their laughter. With wealth came change, subtle, then sharp. James started working late nights, meeting clients who called him at all hours. Hannah's evenings grew longer, her dinners colder. She tried to talk, but he always said, "Just a few more deals, Han. I'm doing this for us." The us began to fade. He grew restless, ambitious, always chasing the next win. She remained gentle, trying to hold on to the home they built. When she asked if he was happy, he laughed too quickly. When she said she missed him, he promised things would get better. They didn't. There was one evening, the first time she truly felt alone in marriage. The city lights shimmered below like a broken necklace. She waited for him with dinner on the table, chicken soup, his favorite. Hours passed. Midnight came. Her phone buzzed. "Don't wait up. Business dinner." She sat at the table and whispered to herself, "Marriage is supposed to mean coming home." But he no longer came home, not really. The storm began slowly. James got into another investment, a massive one. It involved people he barely knew, deals that were vague, papers that glimmered with promise but carried shadows. When Hannah expressed concern, he brushed it off. "You wouldn't understand," he said, his voice sharper than she'd ever heard. "I'm your wife, James. Let me try. I need support, not doubt." She fell silent. Sometimes love looks like patience. Sometimes, it looks like fear. Then the news broke. His company had been accused of fraud. His partners vanished. Investors demanded answers. Journalists called. Reporters camped outside their building. Overnight, the man who once shone like gold was painted as deceit. Hannah watched him unravel. His eyes darkened, his words turned bitter. He stopped sleeping. He shouted more. One night, he broke a glass, and it shattered across the kitchen floor like their years together. When she knelt to clean it, he muttered, "I did all this for us." Her hands trembled. "We were happy before all this." "No," he said quietly. "We were surviving. I wanted you to live. But I only wanted you," she whispered. He didn't answer. The next months were chaos. Investigations, lawsuits, public shame. Their accounts froze. The penthouse was sold. The car disappeared. Friends stopped calling. Even family grew distant. They moved into a small rental house near the edge of town, the kind of place that creaked with wind and memory. The walls were thin, but the silence was thicker. James barely spoke. Hannah tried to hold him, but he flinched away, as if her kindness reminded him of everything he'd lost. One night, she found him sitting on the porch, staring into nothing. She sat beside him, wrapping a shawl around his shoulders. "James," she said softly, "we can start again." He smiled faintly, eyes wet. "You still believe in me?" "I always have." He reached for her hand, and for the first time in months, their fingers intertwined. No wealth, no noise, just skin and warmth. That night, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Han, for everything," and she whispered, "I know." But the next morning, he was gone. A note on the table read, "I need to fix what I broke. Don't look for me." She sat there for hours, staring at his handwriting, steady but trembling at the edges. She didn't cry at first. She just sat, her breath shallow, her body still. Then it came, slow, heavy sobs that filled the small room like echoes of love and loss. Days turned to weeks. She searched, called, prayed. Nothing. He had vanished, like the wind after a storm, leaving only destruction and silence. Years passed. Hannah went back to teaching. Her hair grew longer, her smile softer but sadder. She lived simply, quietly, in a town where no one asked too many questions. Every morning, she made 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one for the ghost of a man she still loved. Sometimes, she thought of that first day in the cafe, how clumsy and alive they were. Sometimes, she wondered if she could have stopped him, if she could have loved him harder, better, differently. But love, she realized, is not always enough to save someone drowning in their own dreams. She kept a photo of them on the nightstand, their wedding day. He was laughing, eyes bright. She was looking at him, unaware that years later, she'd be staring at the same picture trying to remember what it felt like to be that woman. Still, she didn't hate him. She couldn't. Love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape, from warmth to ache, from presence to memory. It was winter when he came back. 5 years had passed. She was walking home from school when she saw him standing by her gate, thinner, older, face carved by regret. His eyes found hers, and for a moment, time collapsed. "James," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Hey, Han." Her knees almost gave way. She didn't know whether to scream, cry, or run into his arms. She did none. She just stared. He told her everything, how he had turned himself in, served time, worked odd jobs, rebuilt himself piece by piece. He had nothing left but remorse, and the memory of her love that had kept him alive. "I thought of you every night," he said. "Your voice, your face, the way you held me when I didn't deserve it." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why didn't you come sooner? I wanted to come back as someone worthy of you." She stepped closer. "You were always worthy, just lost." He looked down. "Can I stay?" Her lips trembled. For a while, the days that followed were quiet. They spoke in fragments, about books, weather, the little things. He helped her fix the garden fence. She cooked him soup like she used to. Sometimes they sat in silence, the kind that felt heavy but not hostile, like 2 souls learning to breathe in the same air again. He was different now, slower, humbler, fragile. The man who once chased skyscrapers now cherished sunsets. The woman who once cried for him now smiled for both of them. One evening, as snow fell softly, he said, "Do you still love me?" She looked at him, really looked. His face had lines, his eyes carried shadows, but beneath it all, there was still the man she married. "I never stopped," she said. He reached for her hand. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not," she said gently. "But love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing, and I choose to remember the good." He smiled, a quiet, broken smile. "You always had the power to save me." She shook her head. "No, James, you had to save yourself. I only held the light." One morning, she found him sitting by the window, looking at the rising sun. He turned, smiled weakly, and said, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" She nodded. "It is." He reached out, and she went to him. His arms wrapped around her, and for the first time in years, she felt the world go still, no chaos, no guilt, no mayhem. Just warmth, just embrace. It was the kind of moment that feels eternal, the silence after a storm, the breath before dawn. Later that day, she brought him tea, but he didn't answer. He was still by the window, peaceful, eyes closed, hands resting gently on his lap. She called his name once, twice. Then she understood. She knelt beside him, her heart breaking quietly. Tears slid down her face, But she didn't scream. She just held his cold hand and whispered, "You came home." Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and endless, like a promise kept too late, yet still kept. Months later, Hannah sat by the same window, watching the same sunrise. His coat still hung by the door. His cup still stood on the shelf. People said she should move on, but how do you move on from a soul that once shared your heartbeat? She thought of their journey, from laughter to loss, from wealth to emptiness, from mayhem to peace. Love had broken them, healed them, changed them, but it had never left. She whispered into the morning light, "Marriage, money, mayhem, all of it was us." And in that whisper was everything, the reflection of love, the ache of sacrifice, the quiet strength of pain, and above all, the power of embrace. Because in the end, what remains is not what we own, but what we hold. And what Hannah held, even in grief, was love that had survived ruin.